fantabulous. Let me out of here. Oh, it says rejoin, so I guess I'm done.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna tweet this
Okay.
out. Everything's about social media these days, John. Everything.
Yeah,
Everything.
for sure. Okay, let me put this back in here like this. Okay. Oh shit. Okay, this should work now.
By the way, can I just
Yeah.
tell you how excited I am about this? I've been wanting to have you either on, back when I did a sports show, I wanted to have you on the sports show. Because I'm like, hey, there's a bunch of like, really good local comedians, and we only talk to like the big ones who come through, but like there's a lot of funny people in this city that we never talk to.
Yeah, thanks. I'm happy to be on here too. Can you hear me okay? Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Let me get this camera. Yeah, I'm excited too, man. I appreciate, the help. This
Hey,
is so fun.
I feel like I'm trying to start this new thing, and starting new things can be discouraging sometimes because, no one watches or, you're not getting you don't have an audience yet.
Right.
And so I guess you probably have felt like you're starting a new thing for a while, being a stand up comedian. I feel like the start process, anytime I hear about people who are like, I'm getting into stand up, and I'm like, I think to myself, first of all, kudos because you've got balls, because it takes a lot of balls to get up there. And then you have to be comfortable with the process of failure because that's really just, you've got to learn a new skill. And that's really all learning is failure. And then it's particularly difficult failure because you're having to deal with people who just shit on you from a distance at times. Do you ever get that? Do you get hecklers? How do you deal with hecklers? Because I've seen some comedians do the heckling thing and they're just like, they don't miss a beat and they just get it. And then other ones are like, it really kind of throws them off because they're trying to work on their craft.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, it depends on the heckler and the situation. Like if it's a Friday second show, because then they're usually really drunk, I'll really just put the hammer down on a little bit.
Sure, sure. Yeah, awesome. Okay, so I figured I'd just like, we'd start wherever you want to start, man. Like I said, I'm a big fan of your comedy. I think you're really, really good. I saw you open for Rory Albanese. I think that was the first show that I had
Oh
seen you
yeah.
at. And I think that was a couple of years ago. And, Rory was on the Daily Show and the Nightly Show. He's a really funny guy.
Right.
He's a different speed than a lot of people. I feel like he's a up and go getter kind of. He's got a lot of energy to him,
Yeah.
and so I think that he's got a, I don't know, typical kind of comedian feel to him. Like he's just,
Mm-hmm.
there's probably a lot of people who have that style. You're totally unique, and I absolutely love that about
Oh,
you.
thanks.
There's like 100%, like I can tell that your comedy kind of comes from a place of your experience, and it's not an act. I guess is a good way to put it. Where do you get your stuff? Like when you're thinking about material, are you just like walking down the street? I think I heard you do some material about being on the bus. Are you just riding around town? What are you doing?
Yeah. I mean, it's the standard thing of like when an idea comes, you have to capture it somehow. So I don't use my phone as much as I should, but I'll have a little notebook, always a pen and paper, and I'll write down the idea or once in a while. I mean, a joke will just come to you and you write it down and you don't have to change it.
Yeah,
But most times it's an idea, you capture it, and then uh, I'll go out for coffee. I used to before all of this,
yeah,
and sit at a coffee shop and write and stuff. But I still do whole lot of that. So it's the whole process of capturing that germ of an idea and then flushing it out later, and then also writing from the stage. I get a lot of callbacks and tags, which are like at the end of a joke. Uh, from an ad lib on stage, and so it's recording my sets. And God, I don't listen to every set. I would go crazy if I did, but I'm good about writing in my notebook. Listen to the March 10th set. the bus joke because I had a new tag. Go back and find that, and then try it again and again and see if it works. You know,
Right, right. So what's it been like writing jokes during all this bullshit that we've been dealing with the last few months?
it's bizarre. I mean, I picked March 10th out of my head just because that was the last show I did.
Hmm.
And right before that, I was in a comedy festival in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I flew back on like the 7th or 8th, and I felt weird about flying then. But writing now, it's like, you know, how much do I really want to do on the pandemic? I don't want to necessarily ignore it altogether, but people are getting inundated with news and misinformation and everything else about what's going on. So I try to keep it pretty light. And like I mentioned earlier when we were setting this up, I've been doing this thing called Afternoon Stream, and so writing for that, and it's just like it's a live stream on Facebook. But writing for that, it's almost like it's really similar to putting together a monologue for what these guys are doing at the stay-at-home shows. But luckily, the producer is a friend of mine, Eugene, and he has a studio in his home. And so I'll make, slides on PowerPoint and then he'll put those up behind me and I have jokes about it. And it's different. It's not like set up punchline tag. It's more like I pick a topic or come up with this goofy idea, like I do this thing called stock image theater. And I just download all these weird stock images and then write a story about it. So I don't know what it's going to be like when I start going back to the clubs, whenever that is. I mean, it'll be a hybrid of my old act and new material, I guess.
Yeah, Brandon Perna and I've been doing a lot of sports content over the last couple of years that's like that. It's like sports comedy stuff. Brandon
Mm-hmm.
Perna's, he does That's Good Sports here in Denver, and he's got a really big audience on YouTube. But I think that the pandemic is going to shift a lot of stand-up comedians or people who want to be personalities into that art form, that kind of Jon Stewart over the shoulder commentary on
Yeah,
stuff.
I do too. And I had a friend who said to me, on this Facebook Live thing, it's not like I'm really racking up a whole lot of viewers, but um, I'm learning this whole new skill, like you say, of the whole over the shoulder thing and being able to do it that way. And so, and you know, I'm not a super religious person. I'm just hoping that somewhere along the way, some industry person who could actually do something for me sees that and goes, hey, man, this guy would make a good correspondent on The Daily Show or whatever, on some late night show. We'll put him, you know, at a Comic Con or whatever and have him interview people once you can start doing that again.
Yeah.
Or even if you can't do that, some virtual thing.
Yeah. You say you're not a religious person. I'm guessing that's a reference to like you're just like you're praying that somebody sees it, right? That's kind of
Yeah,
the
on one
feeling.
level, I definitely am, and it seems weird to say it that way, but I do. I mean, it's a crazy business. I mean, I'm sure it's similar to what you're doing, but it's a crazy business. You can be putting out great stuff, and I'm not bitter about it. It just that's the way it works. There's like people that can make a huge difference in your career by running interference for you. So, yeah, for lack of a better term, I'm praying for something like that. And I mean, I've had some success, but I haven't had that thing that really just boom. All of a sudden, I'm making incredible money, and not that it's all about the money, but you know what I mean.
Oh, well, yeah, for sure. No, I think, if you are in this sphere of influence, you're a talker. And I've been a talker for over 10 years. I started off in Fayetteville, Arkansas as a college kid doing a radio show around sports because that was the only thing
Hmm.
that's in Fayetteville, Arkansas. That it's just college sports.
Right.
It's like Boulder without Denver nearby. So it's, um,
Yeah.
that's you may have been to Fayetteville. I don't know. They do some comedy stuff through there, but um,
Yeah, I've been to Little Rock, but I don't think I've been to Fayetteville.
yeah. Little Rock, fine town. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, Little Rock's. That's what Lieutenant Dan says on Forrest Gump.
Oh,
Um,
that's hysterical.
yeah, he's yeah, but yeah, no, it's one of those places where I just wanted to get out, kind of, but
Hmm.
it's you get this kind of desire to if somebody's going to give you an opportunity to talk to more people, you take it because that's your dream. Is that I want to reach as many people as possible with whatever it is I'm saying, whether it's sports analysis, some sort of crazy political stuff or funny political stuff. I'd say that's probably my favorite thing at this point is making fun of the thing. That's regardless of what it is. Because when I first started out, like back in 2009, I wanted to do a sports daily show. I told
Hmm.
all my friends, it's like, I know I'm doing sports talk radio right now, but my dream is to do what he's doing for sports. And it took me a long time to get around to where I could actually put stuff like that together. But um, it's so much easier now than it used to be. But I think what you're saying is, you know, it's not like you're a money grubber. I don't think you're a money grubber. I don't think anybody would look at you and be like, that guy, Moneybags over there, he's
Yeah,
all
man.
about the Benjamins.
Spending it all on hair care products.
Yeah,
No, it's true. I'm not, and I mean, I thought about it for a long time, and it's one, if I start, well, when I start making some real money, I'm sure I'm going to be good with it just because I've been a comic for so long and living, literally hand to mouth.
yeah,
But the other thing is, and this is what I really thought about, and I want to be known on that national level. I mean, you can call it ego or whatever, but that would make me so happy because stand up is uh, it's brought me so many things already, and I have had success. But it really is like the structure in my life that for some people it's religion or whatever, but it's taught me so much, and I do want to reach that level. And it took me a while to really come to terms with that, just because in my own head I'm like, that's greedy or whatever. But it's not. It's what I'm striving for. It's what my goal is.
yeah. Well, I think that if once again, and I heard this from the president of a major network who was an investor at a company I used to work for, the president of the CW, he Mark Pedowitz. He told me in the right place at the right time, or the right person has to see you, and sometimes the right person can see you, and they're in the wrong mood. He's like, it just has to be right. You just got to get lucky.
Yeah. No, it's true. And I mean, like, if you think about music and bands and stuff, I've gone like after shows when I was traveling more, go out with some of the people from the club, or you meet some people who liked your show, go out with them to a bar, and there's a band that I've never heard of. And I mean, they're just killing it. I'm like, how the hell do these guys not have, some sort of deal with a record company? And it's just what you said. There's a whole bunch of talented people out there, but it does take some luck. And I mean, I won't say who it is. I at a comedy festival, I met a booker for a late night show that my friend, who was a comic who'd been on that show, went out of his way to introduce me to that guy. And I mean, he was just in a horrible mood.
Right.
And it wasn't me, but I mean, he gave me like the limp, shake, like, hey man, nice to meet you. And I said, I said to my friend, wow, that did not go well. And he goes, well, at least he knows who you are now. And, you never know. I mean, it could circle back around and I could do that show or whatever. But that particular moment, it was just like a punch in the gut.
Yeah.
And I don't think it had anything to do with me. It was just at an after party at a festival. It was late at night. The guy was just like, ah, God, another comic.
Right. So, how many people hang out backstage around Comedy Works? Because I've been back there. It's a tight space. It's not like there's a lot of room back there.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. It's interesting you ask that because, first of all, um, my own personal thing is like I respect the hell out of the green room at any club. If I'm not on the show, I'm not going back there unless I'm friends with the comic.
Sure.
Like, I hate to name drop, but Jake Johansson, who is a great comic, he's come through Denver so much that I would feel confident, knocking on the door and saying, "Hey, Jake, how are you?" But, to answer your question, like at a downtown club, I mean, there's usually at least 4 or 5 people in there because Wendy, the owner of the club, will book a local opener, a local 10-minute spot, and a local 20-minute spot. So that's like 3 local comics plus the headliner if they bring someone. And I mean, it depends too on the show. Some headliners will have, a whole crew with them. So it'll be like 8 or 9 people back there. But it's a small green room.
Who brings the biggest posse with them?
Oh, that's a good. Well, probably Pete Davidson. I've never
Ah,
worked with him, But man, I mean, he brings a whole bunch of friends. Like he probably brings 4 or 5 acts with them, and then other friends and stuff. So I'd say Pete. Who else? I mean, Chappelle will bring a lot of people. He loves that club. That's why he works that
Right.
room. You know, he could do like the Belco or something, but he loves the comedy work, so he'll bring some people with him, and he'll have a DJ sometimes, you know, and stuff like that. Those
Yeah.
are probably the two that come to mind first.
Maybe I'm not giving Pete Davidson enough credit, but I feel like when you say Dave Chappelle brings a lot of people, I'm like, he's allowed to bring as many people as he wants because he's got that
Yeah,
clout, you know. And Pete Davidson is funny, but he's like, I think of him as a skit comedy guy, not necessarily as a stand up guy.
yeah, and I think um, without even talking about, I mean, yeah, he's a sketch guy more than a stand-up guy. But I think part of it too is that when you reach that Pete Davidson level, however you reach it, then that affords you the right to go, hey, I'm going to bring bring all these friends. In other words, if you're selling tickets, man, you can, you know, you can do almost whatever you want. Like Chappelle will smoke a cigarette on stage sometimes,
Sure. Yeah.
and it's because he sells out the room.
Has he ever gotten kicked out of a club for smoking? Because I feel like he smokes on stage during his specials too. Like if he's playing a big
Yeah, I
room.
don't know if he has. I'm not sure that he has. Uh,
You
but
got to.
I have a story about Chappelle. I was working Dayton, Ohio, and he doesn't live. I can't remember what the name of the town is, but he doesn't live very far from there.
Right.
And I was featuring, which means I go up like before the headliner and do like 25 minutes. And the headliner was Godfrey, this guy named Godfrey, who's friends with Chappelle. So I'd gone back to the condo. It was a one-show night, and the club calls me and goes, "Hey, Chappelle's here. You should come back." So I went back and hung out with Chappelle and Godfrey. It was so much fun, and he was so nice. And he recognized me, but he couldn't place me. And he goes, "Where are you?" He goes, "Are you from Dayton?" And I was going to hang out on the patio of all places in Dayton, Ohio, at the Dayton Funny Bone with Chappelle and Godfrey.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's awesome. Yeah, it's funny because a lot of people don't get geeked out about comedians, and I do. I absolutely I love comedy and I love comedians. So when I was doing the morning show on Mile High Sports, they'd bring through all these comedians, and so I'm getting to meet people who I've seen on television do, 6,000 7,000 seat places. Like they're
Mm-hmm.
Mark Norman. I remember seeing Mark Norman open for Amy Schumer at Sprint Center in Kansas City, and I got to interview him. And I remember thinking when I saw him open for Amy the first time, I'm like, this guy's good. He's really, really, he's really funny. And I interviewed him on the radio, and I remember telling him, I was like, "Man, you're great." And I went to go see him that night, and he was really good then. But this was pre him being told he was Jerry Seinfeld's favorite comedian. And then after that, I remember just, that's something you have to give somebody shit about, right? If you end up being the guy who comes out of Jerry Seinfeld's mouth, then, you know, I told him, I was like, I feel like that might be a little bit unfair now because now you have expectations on you.
Yeah, no kidding, man. And I mean, there's some people, that like if you get the blessing from Jerry Seinfeld, they expect you to be Seinfeld-esque or whatever the word is. And Mark isn't that, I don't think. But yeah,
He's totally himself.
yeah, yeah. I got a chance to open for him in Denver, and he's very funny and really cool. And that's one thing that's great about Denver is that I've gotten a chance to feature or open for so many big name acts. Norm Macdonald, man, he's like one of my favorites. He's the best, and I've opened for him like 4 or 5 times.
Yeah, and he's a sports fan too. And I remember he did the absolute best ESPYS monologue. He was the host of the ESPYS 1 year
Oh
and one
man,
year only, because he told all these jokes about Brett Favre's affair and all this stuff to Brett Favre, who was in the audience. And athletes are just they're not used to that. They're not used to
right?
having somebody shit on them in front of a national audience. And because, no one is more wrapped up in their ego than athletes, right? They just take themselves
Yeah,
very seriously. It's hard to run that room. So he only got to do it once, but it was the best ESPYS ever.
yeah. I'll have to see if I can find that on YouTube. he also did, and man, well, I'll preface it by saying my ultimate gig was always like the White House Correspondents' Dinner. If I could do that, I feel like I planted the flag on top of the mountain. And now, I mean, it's changed. They don't even have a comic anymore. But
Right.
but Norm Macdonald did the White House Correspondents' Dinner when Bill Clinton was in office, and I think it's still on YouTube, man. And it is so good because I mean, that's a tough gig. You're making fun of these politicians in front of them, and they just, you know. But I don't remember what the joke was, but he did a joke about Hillary Clinton, and the camera panned over to Hillary Clinton, and she was just scowling. It was so good. It's really worth watching. That was a good one, and of course Colbert when
Colbert was
GW was
amazing.
president.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that
gosh,
guy.
I'm drawing a blank
I
on her
was just like,
name, but
what?
the last correspondence dinner that happened, the comedian Wolf, Michelle Wolf,
Yeah,
she killed it. I thought she did an amazing job.
yeah. And when people gave her a bunch of pushback on that, and I'm not talking about the industry people, but just the general public and the politicians and stuff, I was like, that's BS because for one thing, the structure of that is, for lack of a better term, a roast. And I mean, that's what she did. It's
Hmm.
just because, our current president is so thin skinned or whatever that people got mad. But yeah, was it the funniest routine I've ever seen? No, but she did. She honored what the whole thing was about, and yeah, I didn't have any problem with it at all. I didn't see, what the deal was, and it makes me laugh that the year after that, they had a Historia or something on
Right? Yeah,
it.
they're putting Ken Burns up there because they know he's not going to offend anybody. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what do you think of the president? Let's get into some current events here. How's it going for the old DT?
Well, this way that I would vote for a dolphin over this guy. You know, I'm not a Biden fan, but I'll vote for Biden for sure.
Oh
But
yeah, yep.
yeah, it's just of all the time, I don't think there's ever a good time in history to have somebody like that as president. But during this, it's just, I mean, it's a nightmare. I get all my information from Governor Como and Governor Polis. I think Governor Polis is doing a good job, and I trust them way more. I mean, I'll watch a little bit of the highlights of Trump just for this weird, scary comedic effect. But yeah, I mean, I don't believe anything he says. And the people who, I mean, I don't have the answers, but these people who just blindly follow him,
Yeah.
it scares me, man. I'm just like, God, I knew I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but I knew that people were stupid. I just didn't realize how stupid they were, you know?
Sometimes I wonder if it's stupidity or they really want to burn it down. Like I sometimes I think to myself, it's like, all right, maybe I'm not giving them enough credit for wanting to destroy the system. I don't because other than that, I don't really, and I can relate to that a little bit because you said you'll vote for a dolphin over Donald Trump. Not a Biden guy, but you're going Biden, and
Hmm.
I totally respect that. I did the same. I voted for Hillary Clinton last year or last election, even though I was a Bernie person. And
Right.
this time around, it's just so hard for me to do it because I don't know what's going on with him. Maybe you can talk me into this because I would have the whole primaries. I'm like, I'll vote for any of these people except for Joe Biden. I'll vote for any of them.
Right.
Amy Klobuchar's doing great. Love that woman. Elizabeth Warren, absolutely. Tulsi Gabbard, sure. Uh, you know, I can even talk myself into Tom Steyer, who I heard talk all of 45 seconds over a 4 month period. I'm definitely in on Andrew Yang. I'll do any of these people. Pete Buttigieg, absolutely. He seems like he's got a good head on his shoulders and a great future in politics. I just hope that it doesn't ruin him. Also Andrew Yang. I hope both of those guys stick together and stay the same because the politics has a way of turning people into weird creatures. But I can't do Biden, and I feel like if I vote for Biden, I am what's the word? I am condoning bad behavior on the part of the Democrats for just force feeding people institutionalism of like, you know what, this guy may not be coherent right now, but you're really just voting for the party anyway. So vote Democrat. And I just can't do that. I just can't.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said this guy might not be coherent now, but vote anyway. I mean, here's and I agree with you. I voted for Elizabeth Warren in the primary. I liked her, and I mean, I would gladly vote for Bernie. I would vote, like you say, for any of them over Biden. And Biden, uh, man, I mean, ugh, in any other scenario, I'd be like, screw this guy. But here's what I think, and what do I know? I'm a comedian and a weird, you know, dresser or whatever. Um, but here's what I think is that if nothing else, uh, the Biden administration would have people in these positions, not just the cabinet positions, but all the positions underneath that support them. I mean, Trump cut everything back. He got rid of the pandemic response, whatever the hell it was, and all
Yeah.
this other stuff. And so, not that necessarily Biden's going to fill these positions with competent people, and maybe they're all just going to be a bunch of crooks like it's always been. But I just feel at this particular point in history, with literally, in my opinion, and again, what the hell do I know, but the worst president ever, that I'll take anybody over him except for Mike Pence, you know.
I,
So that's why I would vote for Biden. But believe me, it's the kind of vote where, I mean, talk about holding your nose. I'm going to be holding two or three other things too when I vote for the guy. It's not my first choice, but
it's because it just seems so far fetched that he would even get the nomination, and then he got it, and then not only did he get it, but he won. And the the thing about it is that I know everybody wants to point to Russia and say like they colluded, and I'm sure they did. I'm sure everybody's trying to fuck with America's elections all the time. And sometimes they succeed, and there's gerrymandering, and there's all kinds of politics that
right.
go into this stuff, and some shady shit that happens. No question. I want to give America credit for voting for that guy. And I think that we need to come to terms with the fact that there are people who like him. And it's like, you got to figure out what in the hell they see or they want that you don't see and don't want that's there. Because I think figuring out, what it is that motivated people to vote for that guy in the first place is where you have to start with trying to undo all of the damage that that guy's caused.
Yeah, I agree. It's like it's a different it's a different set of thought or logic that a lot of these people have. And the other thing, I think, one of the reasons that he got elected in 2016 was it was a perfect storm for him. I mean, I think Hillary Clinton, I mean, she obviously ran a horrible campaign. There's no denying that.
Not
But
a
I
good
also think,
campaigner, Hillary Clinton. She's really
what's that?
Hillary Clinton was like maybe the most qualified government official to ever run for president, but maybe one of the worst candidates. She just did not seem to present or exude the qualifications that she possessed, as well as Donald Trump exuded the qualifications that he didn't possess.
Right. I think, yeah, I think that's true. And like she ignored those states, Pennsylvania, she should have gone there for that last minute push. But the other thing I think it really illustrates is how much, and I'll use the word hatred there is for the Clintons, that a lot of people were just like, I'm not going to vote for Clinton. I'll vote for the other guy.
Yeah.
And, to use my analogy earlier, I think they would have voted for a dolphin over, over Hillary Clinton. They just were like, I'm not going to put another Clinton in the White House. So he got the opportunity, and then he's just obviously used it to, further his own agenda and line the pockets of all these people. It's like the $1,200. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
That doesn't that doesn't make a difference. I mean, $1,200 is $1,200, but we're talking about people who've been staying home for months now, and probably another month anyway, and I mean probably longer. I mean, it's crazy.
My favorite report about the stimulus checks was that the release of the stimulus checks was delayed 2 weeks because they had to put Donald Trump's signature on all of the checks that
Yeah.
people aren't even getting. Half of these things are just direct deposit.
No, I know. And also, if you do get the check in the mail, I mean, you're going to have it in your hands for maybe 24 hours. I mean, people aren't going to be like, oh, look at that. Wow, I'm so glad the president signature is on this. Maybe I'll save this, instead of cashing the 1,200 bucks.
Right. Yeah, it's ridiculous. But you like Polis. A lot of people have been criticizing Polis because he opened the state back up really early.
Yeah, I was a little surprised at that, and it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, 2 weeks from now, we'll see what kind of move that was. That one did surprise me a little bit, but I think in general that he's you know straightforward and truthful about stuff. So I appreciate that. And like I say, Governor Como, I don't watch, you know, I can't watch this stuff every day, but I'll
Right.
check in on that kind of stuff. But yeah, I trust Polis way more than I trust the president.
Oh, infinitely. I wouldn't trust anything Donald Trump said, even if it was something good. In fact, probably in particular, if it's something good, I wouldn't trust what Donald Trump says.
Yeah, for sure.
I stopped following him 4 or 5. It was right after he had gotten elected, so like 3.5, 4 years ago. I stopped following him on Twitter. I'm like, why am I doing this to myself? Why am I just? Because I would get angry. I would start to realize like I was on Twitter and I'm like, why am I crushing my phone with my hand? It's like, okay, I just need to like calm down. Just stop following the president. I muted him on Twitter.
Yeah, I should probably do the same thing. I still follow for that weird watching a train wreck thing, but I use it from a humorous angle. But I never understood why these network news shows don't use that same technique and just eliminate the jokes, because he was great at like showing, like if you use Lindsey Graham as an example, he'd show a video of Lindsey Graham, you know, 10 years ago or 8 years ago going, we're never going to do this, and then show a current video of him going, we're going to do this. And they just don't report like that. I guess, I don't know, my theory is they want access to all these politicians for like the Sunday morning programs or their special programs and stuff. But I wish somebody would use that reporting technique, because that was great. I mean, when Jon Stewart had the Daily Show, that was actually a legitimate source of news, in my opinion.
Yep, I agree. And I always feel bad for Trevor Noah because Trevor is a really good stand up comedian, and I think his stand up is really good. I just can't watch The Daily Show with him, and it's not. It's like really, honestly, he's a funny person. It has nothing to do with that. It's just like I just something changed. His delivery is a little different. His technique is a little different, but. I think you're right. I remember interviewing Andrew Schultz, who's a pretty big YouTube comedian now, kind of in
Mm-hmm.
that Joe Rogan crew of comedians. He he said he loves Jon Stewart and he thinks Jon Stewart's hilarious, but he thinks Jon Stewart ruined comedy in a lot of respects because it created this partisanship. And he's like, comedy is about following the funny regardless of where it leads. And I think that's a I love that mentality. I'm like, that seems like that's a comedian's mentality. It's like, I don't care about partisanship. But he said that this idea of activism, it was unintended from Jon Stewart, that okay, now comedy has to represent a position or some sort of good force in the world, and so a lot of people just think that's what comedy's for. And he just feels like it ruined a lot of the new age of comedy.
Yeah, I mean, I see that point, and I guess you could call that collateral damage, from Jon Stewart. A couple of things. I mean, Colbert retired around the same time as Jon Stewart, and I've always said the biggest shoes to fill or not Colbert, Letterman retired, and Colbert took his spot. But
Right.
I think the biggest shoes to fill were by far Jon Stewart's. For one, it was sort of a surprise, but also, and I like Trevor Noah too, but it isn't the same. And the other thing I was going to say is I think there's a big difference between what's televised late night comedy and clubs. Like if you watch Colbert, it's like 85 or 90% monologue jokes about Trump. So people who like that tune into it.
Yeah.
But if I go to a comedy club and do a bunch of jokes about Trump or anything, or Biden, you split the room. And so my approach is like I'll do topics, but not actually talk about individuals. But yeah, I mean, I think it has changed it. Stewart changed it, and I get that point.
Yeah, I kind of look at Jon Stewart as the guy who probably did influence my comedic sensibilities more than anybody else because I watched The Daily Show every single night as a kid. You know, I didn't know Craig Kilborn, so I knew that he was on Sports Center, but I never watched him on The Daily Show. When I came into The Daily Show, it was like 2000, so it was like
Hmm.
right at the beginning of Jon Stewart, right before 9/11. And then when he did the 9/11 thing, it was like, this guy is legit. You know, he could, because he did 9 serious minutes on 9/11, and it was amazing, and he got some laughs in there too, which is like, how did you do that?
Yeah,
But it would like that just my generation. Like I'm 33 years old, but at the time, I was a kid, in junior high school. He basically just he got the youth of America on board with what he was saying.
yeah, he did, and it was amazing. I mean, um, like I say, those were the biggest shoes to fill by far. If Leno, uh, Letterman, Jon Stewart,
If you
and I do like Trevor Noah, but I agree, man. I mean, it just isn't. It's not the same. It's a different show now.
Well, it's funny too because you can change the host and it can change the show. But you can change the show and it changes the host too, because I felt like that and was funny and I loved it because he just nailed that character. And then now it's a little different. He's it's a little different, and I will admit, like the Trump jokes all the time, it wears me out. Even as
Yeah.
much as I dislike the guy, I can't. I wish because he's got so much range. He's got so many other things he could tell jokes about and be funny about, and he just sticks to the one thing. And I feel like that's maybe the CBS influence, or like got to keep the ratings up. And once he got that rating surge for making fun of Trump, he just is like, I got to ride this out.
No, I agree. I mean, that character that he did, on the Colbert Show, and again going back to the White House Correspondents' Dinner, that's when I'm like, this guy has balls as big as basketballs. You know what I mean? Because he was like those guys at first. I mean, what's funny to watch about that is when it first starts, the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and he's in character. They're kind of laughing and moving along, and then
Right.
you just see, they figure out, man, he is just totally dismantling the Bush people, and
Yeah.
then they're scowling. And that's when I was like, this guy's amazing because he did not break character. It got really weird and uncomfortable, but
Yeah.
he just kept doing it.
The
But yeah,
president
I
is
agree.
like 10 feet
Oh, go ahead.
away. Yeah.
But yeah, I agree with you. Like the monologue now, it's like, okay, and he'll do the monologue, and this was before they did the stay-at-home stuff, but even some of that. But he would do a monologue in front of an audience and just beat the hell out of Trump. And I'm not obviously a Trump supporter, but then they go away, and the second segment before they brought in a guest was just more beating up Trump. And I agree with you. It's like, dude, there's so much out there. How about some other jokes?
Right. Do you like this Joe Rogan movement of doing? Because basically, what he's done is he's recreated a format and a context for that type of talk show entertainment on
Hmm.
YouTube, and it's isolated. It's a little bit more like what we're doing right now. It's just like internet talking, and but I've heard a lot of his guests say the same thing, whether it's a comedian or some astrophysicist that he's got on. It's he's that like he's now that kind of late night talk show entertainment for a lot of people. Do you think that that's true? Do you like that? Do you think that opens up opportunities for people?
Yeah, I mean, just from a standpoint of someone who's in the industry as a comic, and I've talked to other comic friends about it. It's like, if you look at it this way, would you rather do Joe Rogan's podcast or a Tonight Show? Which would be more beneficial to your career? It's, in my opinion, it's by far Joe Rogan's podcast, and I think there's a couple others that are like that. Mark Maron and maybe Tom Segura and Christina P. But from
Yeah.
that standpoint, yeah, it's way more influential than like a late night appearance, is great. But I just think that a podcast like that would do so much more for you. I'm not a big podcast guy. I mean, I've listened to maybe, you know, 5 minutes of Joe Rogan over the last year. It's just I don't know. I need to get into it, but yeah, from a standpoint of it's a new medium or whatever you want to call
Hmm.
it, a new form that can do a lot for you if you're on that show.
Yeah, it's funny. Because I've grown up as a liberal person. Although I will say, I think I have some right leaning tendencies. I think at times my political affiliations kind of look like the blanket behind you. I'm all over the place. And really, I feel like my biggest thing throughout my life has always been like I want to say what I want to say. So the First Amendment's really important to me. Don't try to stop me from saying what I want to say. Okay, if you are one of the, as Chappelle would put it, the alphabet people,
Hmm.
the I want to control the speech that you use. 20% of it belongs to us. You're not allowed to use these words. Those. When I was growing up, those were the religious people. Those were the right people. The people who were on that side who were like, you're not allowed to make fun of religion. You're not allowed to make fun of us. You're not allowed to say these things. And it was really kind of constricting from that perspective. So I'm like, I'm definitely on the opposite of that. And now, especially over the last maybe like 5 or 6 years, I feel like that's flipped a little bit. Where now the people who are trying to say, why is this bothersome to me, but all these people that I've aligned myself with over the last 20 years of my life, why am I incongruent with how they see the world all of a sudden?
Yeah, well, and I mean, it's a cliche, but it's that double-edged sword. You know what I mean? Like the religious people are saying, "Hey, you can't say this," and now the whatever you want to call it,
Social
uh,
justice warriors or whatever the
yeah,
label you want
or
to put
like
on it, right?
this is
Political
inappropriate,
correctness.
and you can't say this. It's like I say, freedom of speech has a double-edged sword, and unless and it goes back to and again, I mean, I don't want to put myself down, but what the hell do I know? I'm a high school graduate. Although I have to say, I thought the high school did a good job with me. But my point is, unless you are inciting violence or something illegal, then say it. And if it offends people, then don't listen to it or come back with your own comment that
Right.
doesn't incite violence or riots and stuff.
Sure.
It's weird, man. I don't get it. How we supposedly have, well, we do. I guess we have freedom of speech, but that so many people get upset. And I think one of the things that in the last 3 or 4 years that, and this has taken a shot at the televangelists, but man, it's pointed out the hypocrisy of these guys.
Oh,
They get
yeah.
somebody in there who is quote pro-life and will put in conservative judges, and they look the other way on all this. The guy paid, excuse me, $130,000 to a porn star to keep her quiet, and they're like, he's changed.
You know what they're thinking? They're like, so did that guy who runs Liberty. Like the they,
Yeah, he blocked me. Jerry Falwell blocked me on Twitter, so that was a big day
I
for
saw
me.
I saw yesterday this tweet about the Liberty. Jerry Falwell has eliminated. They fired the entire philosophy department at Liberty University yesterday without
Wow.
warning, and I thought that's a bit on the nose, right? You know, that's a little bit. It's like they're going down the line items. Like, all right, what's the least essential department that we have? Anything to do with thinking. All right.
Yeah.
Well, why didn't I think of that?
Yeah, we don't
That's a bit
want
on
these
the nose.
students thinking on their own.
Right. And I just feel like that's what's frustrated me about the right is like the sheeple aspect of it. It's like, think for yourself, man. And that's why what's happening, and this is once again to get back, not to beat a dead horse, but like the Biden thing, you know, I just feel like my disappointment in the Democratic Party has been this is why I picked you guys in the first place because you hold yourselves to a higher standard. You're not going to get down in the mud. You're actually going to represent the values of the positions that you hold as opposed to the partisan position against the other side. It's not do whatever it takes to win. It's these are the right things to do for society, and that's what we're going to hold up. And I just feel like that's changed so much because they're tired of losing elections, and so they're like, well, we have to fight the way that they fight because they're better at winning elections than Democrats are. They just are. Because they have no worry about governance, right? Because on the other side, the right, the Republican Party, their whole thing is get rid of the government. So once they're in there, their job is to just fuck shit up, right? They're just to remove things or get rid of things or then pay their corporate lackey overlord, whatever you want to call them. But that's also kind of what's happened to the Democratic Party, and I just now I feel like I'm my uncle from 20 years ago, where he's like, "Ah, they're all the same," and I'm like, "But they're not the same." And now I'm at that point where I'm like, I think they might be the same. I might have been wrong this whole time.
Yeah, I think that's correct. I mean, there's this whole, payback mentality now of like when we get in, you know, watch out because we're going to make it shit for you guys. And it's just this attitude of like one against the other. I mean, it's sad that it literally, the two-party system has really, it's just one party now. And I mean, there's a few differences, but yeah, I mean, maybe you're going to convince me not to vote for Biden, but yeah, there is that. Just wait till we get in, and then we're going to fix this and screw you guys over. And
Yeah.
it's nobody's looking at all this money goes to these big corporations. Well, I mean, I understand. We're on the verge of whatever you want to call it, a depression or a huge recession, or we're already in it. But there's very little thought about the people who are living in a one-bedroom apartment, you know,
Right.
struggling by. But man, we got these airlines covered, and I think that it's that way on both sides, which is unfortunate.
And I don't know how to fix it. Like that's where it's kind of where I'm at right now is like, you know, I kind of want to change my political affiliation on Facebook to just the guillotine. Just like at this point, we're at where the French were like 200 years ago. I don't know other than violent political revolt, like what the options are at this point, because they just don't. They're not going to listen to normal people. They don't care.
No,
We're irrelevant to the equation at this point.
and I mean, for a long time, I was like, I was, and I guess I still am. I'm in favor of third parties. Like when people say that Ralph Nader cost Al Gore the election, I was like, well, Al Gore, Al Gore did a horrible job. I remember when in one of those debates, he had like baby doll makeup on. He had big, pink
Yeah.
circles on his chin, and not that, but I mean, appearance does make a difference. But when people say that Ralph Nader cost him the election, I was like, the only way that a third party is ever going to be viable is if it does start doing stuff like that, because then maybe it can grow the grassroots thing. And obviously, the Ralph Nader thing faded miserably or whatever. But yeah, I don't know. But at this particular junction, I'm like, I'm not voting for a third party candidate. Although if we
Yeah.
keep talking, maybe I will. But
Well, that's the thing with third parties is like I really want one, and I think that you really want one, and I think everybody is looking around like if there were a third option, I think I might go with the third option. But part of it is like first of all, the rules are basically they make the electoral college solidified with the two-party system because third-party candidates aren't guaranteed any electoral votes based off of the popular vote, and which is
right.
also like wait a second, you start learning about American history and, and civics and how all that stuff works. You're like, wait a second, how does this work? And then people get mad at the Electoral College and start blaming the system for the losses as opposed to the people because Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, George or Al Gore won the popular vote, and
Right.
then they're these it's messed up. I get it. Like I understand that it is messed up, but at this point it's all you have. So you have to play by the rules or lose.
Yeah, I don't know what the answer to this is, but I thought of this. if you if you win the electoral college but don't win the popular vote, there needs to be, and this would create a whole nother election, but some sort of a runoff where maybe then it just goes to popular vote. I don't know what the answer is, but I think if you can't win both, you shouldn't win the election. There has to be some other way. I don't know what it is. You can't have, Congress decide it. I don't know, but
I
it
just
just doesn't seem right to me that, and obviously, again, I'm liberal. So the two times that you just mentioned, Al Gore and Trump, I was pissed because I'm like, these guys didn't even win the, or George Bush and Trump, they didn't win the popular vote. So how the hell can they be president? I mean, I think they should just get rid of the electoral college, really. But if you're going to keep it, there has to be a way to to make it legitimate.
Right.
You know?
Runoff, I like it. Instead of doing another election, though, we should have a KY Jelly wrestling match. And
Yeah.
look, this is not Carmen Electra getting. She's not running for president. So when we're talking KY Jelly wrestling match, you have to realize who is doing the wrestling and whether or not you want to see that. And then I think if we see it once, I think it will only take one time before we get our shit together and realize that we need a better system than we currently have.
Right. I think you're right. If we would have seen Hillary and Trump in a KY wrestling match, the electoral college would be abolished.
The next day, emergency session. We have to fix this.
Yeah.
That's great. It's funny you mentioned too that like you don't want to divide the room a lot of times in comedy. And the kind of the flip of perspective is one of the things I think makes comedy great. Is like you tell somebody the truth about something, but those moments yesterday where I started thinking about abortion, which is like a winless argument, because COVID and how to handle it is this winless argument right now that is right at the forefront of American culture. You see people arguing about what the right thing to do is every single day. Keep people at home, to keep people safe, versus the rights people have to go out and live their lives and enrich their lives. And I started thinking pro-life or pro-choice because that's the argument that people are making. But the weird thing about it is that the people who are very much pro-choice on abortion are pro-life when it comes to COVID. They're like, restrict people's movements. We gotta keep this thing from spreading. And the people who are very much pro-life on abortion are now pro-choice when it comes to COVID. When in reality, like the rationalization for all four of those groups is the same. Everybody just wants to enrich their well-being, right? Your well-being as an individual, your subjective conscious experience is a real thing. So you have a right as an individual to enrich that. And so people will, everybody is basically making an argument for life. It's like either the quality of life or the existence, the incessantness or insistence of life. That it's the most important thing, regardless of anything else. And I like turning people's opinions in on themselves to where they realize the places that they're arguing from and like the origin of that. Because if you really get back down to the origin of where people's arguments are coming from and these winless arguments, everybody's working, we're all trying to push in the same direction. I don't want your life to be shit, but I also don't want my life to be shit. And right now, those two things, in a lot of respects for people, are at odds with one another. And we don't know what to do when that happens. We have no idea, and then things just fall apart and deteriorate.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you on that. Excuse me. And I think also, I mean, a couple of things. One, whatever happened to tolerance? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it just doesn't seem like we can't tolerate other people's beliefs or actions. But the thing that's really interesting to me, like you talked about the people who are like, the Operation Gridlock people who think that they have the right, to go into open businesses and not wear masks and all that stuff.
Right.
And they're also, a lot of them, I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush, but like you said, a lot of them are pro-life. And they say, as far as like, if you ban abortions, if it saves just one life. And I mean, I get that on one level, but then you're saying that you should be able to go during a pandemic with a highly contagious virus, that you should be able to go wherever the hell you want and not
Right.
wear a mask.
Right.
How many people are you putting in jeopardy doing that? And it's like, I'm just full of cliches today, but what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I mean, I don't understand that part of it, but I know what you're saying. It's like basically we're all pulling for the same thing. It's just we have a different approaches.
Absolutely. And it's just like I wish people could get together and talk about these things as opposed to I think the distance, the lack of social proximity between arguers is a real problem with coming to some sort of resolution, because people are looking at it in terms of, I want to advance my position, as opposed to, I want to come to a resolution, or I want to gain information, or I want to learn something to this effect, right? As opposed to just simply saying win. I want to win. This is an argument. This is a battle, and the goal of a battle is to win. It's like the Michael Jordan mentality. I don't know if you've been watching this documentary that everybody's been
I
talking about.
haven't, but I've heard about it.
Yeah.
But,
It's the only sports that's happening right now. So all of the sports
mhm.
junkies are just, they're getting their fix on this Michael Jordan documentary. What ESPN is having coaches from 30 years ago come back and call them to task as to why they upset Michael Jordan 25 years ago. It's hilarious. But his whole mentality was, I have to beat you. It's not, I want to win. It's, I have to beat you. And that is the mentality that he has engendered in American culture. And I know that trying to win, who's the greatest winner of all time? Michael Jordan. How does he win? He beats you. That's how he works. And, that's how Republicans work too. Republicans are all about beating Democrats. They could give a rip about representing whatever. They just know if they beat Democrats, they're going to get what they want. They're going to be happy with that because people are that simple, or at least their voters are that simple. Most of their base is.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the other thing too is that social media affords people, even if you have a Twitter handle or a name on Facebook and stuff, but you still have that anonymity of like, I'm just going to tell this guy to eat crap, and
Right, right.
and it's like I'm going to prove my point. This guy's a snowflake and all that, and so it magnifies it. But there is that whole idea of like, well, if we win, screw those other people. We beat them, so it's just like William Barr when he's recommending that they let Michael Flynn go, and then someone
I
interviewed
thought that
William
already
Barr.
happened. I thought he got released, or
Yeah, I don't
he's.
know. He may have. I just remember that somebody on like CBS was interviewing the Attorney General of the United States, going, "How do you think history will, remember this?" And he goes, "Well, history is written by the winners, so we'll see." And
Yeah.
it's that I was like, that's a pretty cavalier attitude of like, as long as we win, I'm good.
Have you seen
You
this
know?
show on Amazon called Man in the High Castle?
No, I haven't. I'll have to watch. Is that
It's
about Nazi Germany or something or
Yes,
no?
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
it's about like if the Nazis won World War II, which
Uh
on its face is maybe not the best premise for a show, but it's based off. Right? It's based off a book that's all about how these people get out of the situation. But so I think that's what saved it, is that it was based off of a really popular book series. But that's one of the things that the characters say a lot of times in the show is like, we have a chance to be on the right side of history by joining the Nazis and protecting ourselves. Basically, they're in a society where it's like, I have to figure out how to live because they've already won the war and this is the reality. So I have to save myself and my loved ones. And being on the right side of history is just a reality of like picking whichever side's going to win so that I live. And like, as much as I may hate that statement that William Barr said, like, it's hard to disagree with it based off of. I mean, he's right. That's what the scary thing about that.
Yeah, he is right. And like you were saying, if the Nazis had won, um, then it is a matter of like, how do I survive? Like, how do I stay on the right side of history to keep my family and me alive? You have to make these horrible choices. Um, and I'm not equating Trump to to Hitler, not yet anyway. But
He's not there
um,
yet, but there's, hey,
yeah,
that's not the craziest. I've heard, like Bill Maher says stuff like that all the time, and people like boo in his audience. He's like, hey, like, what's all this stuff that they said? Every single writer who wrote any sort of substantial piece of literature during World War II said, look, there were chances we had to stop this before it happened, and we did not pay attention. And
yeah,
like, that's the whole thing. So when people gruff, it's like, oh, you can't compare him to a mass murderer, genocidal maniac like Hitler. It's like, if you're not gonna look at the context clues of tyranny and then react to them, what are we doing here? What's your goal in life if you're not gonna stay like what do you stand for then? Do you stand for nothing? Money? Yourself? What is it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. And if you look like this was like maybe 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago now, when Trump was, somebody said, well, isn't it up to the states to decide when when they reopen and stuff? And he's like, I'm the president of the United States, and I'm paraphrasing, but he's basically like, I'm the president of the United States. What I say goes. And then the next day, he's like, well, the governors, da da da. And it's just like you say, when do people go? And I'm not out in the streets, so I include myself in that. But when do people go? Enough is enough, And it's easy to pick on him, on Trump, but it's systemic. I mean, it
Yeah.
really is. And when are people finally? I'm not saying I'm not calling for revolution, but when are people going to stand up and go, enough is enough? And in 2020, I saw a
Yeah.
tweet. I can't remember who wrote it, but it was like in World War II, people were like, we need to, get all this scrap metal together and build bombs or whatever. I'm like, we'll do it. And in 2020, it's like, I'm not wearing a cloth mask. That's against freedom of choice.
Yeah.
And it's a different, sadly, a different world now, I guess.
Did we get lazy? Is that what happened? Because you're right. People used to be gung ho about building bombs for America, and now it's like I'm not going to wear a mask for my neighbor.
Yeah, I think we did get lazy, and it's a comfortable lifestyle, and I mean we have Netflix, Amazon, Hulu. I mean it's so easy, and right now I'm grateful because I'm spending easily 22 hours a day at home. I go for walks and stuff, but
Yeah.
you know,
I was
but yeah,
thinking,
I think
I see all these things hanging off of your blanket back there. You mentioned your high school diploma earlier. I think it's a bona fide, and you should put it on your blanket. You should hang it up there,
my high school diploma. I still have it. I should hang it
like you're a
up.
doctor.
Yeah, let me talk to you. I'm a high school graduate.
That would, I don't know. I think that would be funny. That's so. To change topics here a little bit.
Mhm.
Do you live in Boulder? Is it? Do I have that right, or do you live in Denver?
Yeah, I live in Boulder. I grew up here, and I mean, I traveled a bunch in the United States doing comedy, and I just think the Denver Boulder area is really hard to beat.
I agree. I live in Parker, which is the
Hmm.
opposite of Boulder, basically. But it's beautiful. It's absolutely fantastic. We love going up to Boulder. The tea room up there is really
Yeah,
awesome.
that's
Um,
great.
and it's crazy too because I was an atheist for a long time, and I would say I'm agnostic now, but I've had some experiences that have maybe changed my openness to there being more than nothing, which is a hard is a, it's a, that might be a hard thing to explain to somebody, but you're from Boulder, so I think you might be able to understand what I'm getting at. I guess Sam Harris is probably like the. Do you know who Sam Harris is?
I don't.
He's a philosopher. He's all about like spirituality without religion. So
Hmm.
there's a really famous philosopher named Alan Watts who's had a bunch of.
Yeah, I know who he is.
Okay, all right, sweet. He's I think most notable for bringing like Eastern religion to the United States and European countries and things like that. I've always kind of associated Boulder with that kind of culture, that kind of spirituality without religion, so to speak. It seems like maybe I'm wrong, but I just feel like that's what Boulder has kind of been known for. There's a lot of influence of spirituality, kind of a searching kind of feeling to Boulder.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I mean, I certainly I don't I guess I would consider myself agnostic too, but I can tell you this. I went through a divorce. I was married for almost 11 years, and I went through a divorce, and we never, when I was married, never went to church and all that stuff. But when I got divorced, I really felt the need for something in my life, and I went to the church that we got married in, which we'd never gone to, and I went to that church for like 5 or 6 years, and I volunteered at that church, and I mean, it helped me in a really difficult part of my life, and I'm so grateful to that. I mean, I got away from it, and I don't regret getting away from it, but it served. a really valuable purpose to me during that time. When I was just like, I wouldn't say I was a rudderless ship, but I was hurting, man, and I needed something, and it really helped. And I still stay in touch with some of the people from that church. So I mean, I think there's a real value in that. But I do think that Boulder does kind of have that. And this wasn't the church wasn't like Catholic or Protestant or whatever. It was a New Age kind of groovy church, but there's some real value to that. And I do think Boulder has a lot of that kind of stuff. I
Do you?
mean, Naropa, one of the campuses, is right across the street
Yeah.
from where I live.
Do you think that that community allows people who are uh, different, unique, people who want to maybe display that uniqueness? They want to be themselves. I guess I feel like Boulder is maybe a not a oasis, but just it's kind of a place that people like that gravitate towards.
Yeah, I do think that there's that. And I think also, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. I mean, it can also be a slippery slope, and it's not just in Boulder, but that some people will embrace that to the degree of, if you're not with me, you're against me. But I think for the most part, it is pretty welcoming, and that people are understanding, and that, there is that sort of, you can be on your own path and come with us, but you can still kind of be separate. I mean, I think like anything, there's extremes, but for
Yeah.
the most part, I think you're right about Boulder that it does sort of reach out that way to people.
Do you think that's a youthful thing too? Because Winston Churchill's always like, if you're not liberal when you're young, you have no heart, and if you're not conservative when you're old, you have no brain. And I feel a little bit of what he's saying as I get older. I start to realize you're not right about all of the moral views that you hold in like certainty. I try to stay away from certainty now. Just in general, I'm like, if you feel like you're certain about things, you're probably wrong. That seems like that at least from what I can observe around me, the certain people are the ones who seem to be screwing everything up.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I do I mean, man, you know, if you don't change as you get older, if you don't change, you know, I just think that's bizarre. I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily more conservative as I get older, but I definitely have changed. And I agree with you that certainty, is the worst when you're just like, this is the way it's going to be.
Hmm.
And if you don't believe that, then you're wrong and screw you. Uh, you know, I like to think that I'm open to other people's ideas that will change me and maybe not put me on a totally different course, but at least go, God, I never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it does come with age.
I'm gonna have to watch your show on Facebook Live because your conversation with me every time you start talking, and you're making a serious point or something, but the visual of you talking and making serious points or just talking in general in front of that blanket is it's A plus. It's great.
Yeah, it's quite the show.
So what do you talk
Quite
about? Like, what do you give me some idea of what's on this show?
well. You know, I usually do. Uh, there's a couple of different. Well, there's some segments. I do bad clip art. I bought this CD-ROM like years ago called Click Art, and
Yeah.
it's the worst clip. So I'll put together some bad clip art and talk about that. I usually pick a topic, and then like I'm actually going to do what's going to happen to sports today.
Hmm.
And so we're going to talk about what sports are going to be acceptable, like tennis you can play with social distancing, so stuff like that. I do a puppet show, which is just crazy. It's like I have like Joe dolls and stuff, and hold them up and make them do weird stuff.
You're like the
And
new
I'll
age
tell
Mister Rogers.
Yeah, it's sort of that's what I am. Somebody else said, I'm doing like a fireside chat, so stuff like that, and then I'll tell a joke out of my act. And I do prop humor. I'll have some weird props and hold those up and stuff like that. So, and it usually runs. Uh, when we first started doing it, it was like 15 or 20 minutes. It usually runs about 20 or 25 minutes. And a lot of it is like, especially the first segment or two, is, like what these late night guys are doing now with the stay at home shows. So it's sort of a monologue. But yeah, I just try to dream up different segments.
Yeah, I love the idea of you doing current events, but it's just the events that have occurred around your apartment recently. You know,
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to check the show out because I love that format of comedy. I think it's great. I've made some attempts at it, but I don't think I work hard enough at it. I think that's my big problem. My buddy Brandon, who's who does work hard enough at it. That's why he's got 200,000 followers or whatever he's got now on YouTube. But
Hmm.
he you should check out his perfect for like to do some correspondence or some kind of something
Yeah,
on
that'd be awesome.
especially if I because I don't how much do you pay attention to sports? You may not pay attention to sports at all, which is I don't know at this point
Um,
maybe
I
preferable.
used to be a huge baseball fan, and I'm just not a baseball fan anymore. When the Rockies trained in Tucson, spring training, I worked a club there, and that guy would book me every year for spring training. The one sport that I still really like is the NFL. I've always just been an NFL fan. I'm not a college fan, but I follow that, and I'm a Bronco fan because I grew up here. But the other sports, I just, you know, I, I
Eh, yeah,
I like going to a baseball game every once in a while. It's fun to go, but I was like into fantasy leagues and all that stuff, and I quit that years
really,
ago.
really. Okay, so no more into the fantasy sports, just like the regular sports, but
Yeah,
baseball and then football now.
yeah. Football's my number one, and then probably baseball number two.
Yeah,
But
that's
when baseball was going, I didn't even pay attention to the standings. I mean, I would root for the Rockies a little bit, but I didn't really care that much. It was
yeah.
more fun just to go to the game with friends and have a beer and stuff.
It is. It's way better. And after having spent a decade in sports media, I don't understand why, unless you are listening to a really good show, like Dan Levitard. I think Levitard right now is doing the best talk show in America. And you think, oh, I don't want to listen to this because it's 3 hours of a sports talk show and it's going to be sports. He could talk 15 seconds of sports in a 3 hour period um, on ESPN, and it's still the best show that's on there. In fact, I think it's one of the reasons why it's the best show on there because they don't talk about sports hardly at all and never in a serious context. They are trying to make people laugh. They're trying to have fun with the show, and I think that if you do those two things, basically, if you're trying to make people laugh, if you're trying to be happy, make people laugh, make people think. And if you can teach them something at some point, if there's some sort of like I've learned something from this show today, if you have those three things, you're going to have spectacular audience retention. You're going to get people to listen to you, and they're going to stay with you for a long time. If you can deliver that on a regular basis, it's never going to go away. At least, and it doesn't matter what the topic is. I think that's really the most important thing that anyone who's trying to get into this needs to know is I don't necessarily think the topic matters that much, or at least it seems to me to not matter that much. If you can get people hooked on laughter, you got them. Like that's it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this isn't a sports talk show, but there's a radio show in Omaha, and there's a great comedy club there, the Omaha Funny Bone. But they'll have the comics on there, and the show's called Todd and Tyler. I think they call it the Radio Empire, and it's like three guys, but it's the same thing. It's like even though it's not sports, they don't stick to just one thing, and they'll have they have their funny segments and stuff, but the overriding factor of that show, which makes the appeal, is that they're funny. That no matter what they talk about, and they can be a little bit, for lack of a better term, bawdy or mildly dirty. I mean, it's still broadcast radio, but they're funny and they have a good interaction, and people tune in. If I do that show, I mean, I won't get hundreds of followers, but I definitely notice on my social media a whole bunch of people from the Midwest are
Hmm.
sending me friend requests. and it's just because I go on there with them, I have a good rapport with them, and it's funny, and people are engaged. And I agree, no matter what the genre is or what the topic is, if it's sports, but if you can, I mean, 3 hours of just sports, that would just be, too much.
It's too much for anybody, John. That's the point,
Hmm.
is that no one who's in their right mind and living a healthy life is listening to 3 straight hours of sports talk radio. uh,
Yeah,
I mean, maybe it's a little different today, but because everybody's stuck in
right.
one place. But like, if everything's normal and you're out and moving around, like, what are you doing? Why are you this obsessed with wanting to hear your sports team's name just in case they talk about your team? You're listening to the whole thing. Like, there's a lot of people like that, just by position until they talked about every single player, and then they start over, and then they're like, all right, well, let's do it again. And
Yeah, an endless loop day after day after day,
yeah, it's like,
because
how do you
Garrett
do
Bowles
that,
gonna
man?
hold.
That's right. Uh, John, this has been great. I've really enjoyed talking with you. I would love to have you back on, and I one of the things I would love to do is get more involved in the comedy community here locally in the Denver area, because I think there's a lot of funny people here who deserve to have fun conversations. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. That's really my only goal here, is just to be like, all right, I hope you enjoyed this past hour of your life, because I
Yeah, it was great, man. Thank you so much for having me on. And yeah, I'd love to do the show again. And if I can point you in the direction of some local comics, just message me.
Yeah, I know Mel Gibson, which that's not going to mean anything. It's going to mean something different to anybody who watches this who doesn't understand the context of that. But she's in charge of Comedy Works, and I know her, but
Yeah, she's great.
everybody else, I'm a little I'm a little away. I haven't been to Comedy Works in a while, so obviously with the pandemic, it's kind of difficult. But
Yeah, for
there's some
sure.
really really funny people in this city.
Yeah. Well, and like I say, if I can point you to some local comics, I'll certainly help out. And thank you so much for having me on the show. It was a blast. I had a great time.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, John. Well, we're gonna end it here, and I guess we'll talk at you on the internets.
All right. Thank you very much. Have a good one.
All right, take care.
Bye.